So I can see in the chat we've got a few people here, which is brilliant. Hello, everyone. We've got Rob, Corey, and Brad. Oh, and Neil. Fantastic.
Yep.
So I'll mention now that I've gone through all of the posts that have been up on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube about today. And we've got a number of people that have put forward some ideas for our topic, which was the sort of tips to think about when you're starting your first guitar build. So I'll drop them in later. But if anyone, as we're going along, wants to in the chat suggest any tips or feedback for things that we're suggesting, please put them in the chat. But as someone mentioned before, it's really helpful if they're in capitals or there's some sort of thing at the beginning, big exclamation mark to make them stand out.
Mm.
So how have you two been this week?
Busy.
I can tell from all your updates with your guitar that's presumed. Actually, when you do things like that, are they going up live as you do them, or do you do your stuff and then put your posts up sort of a week or so later when you've got more time?
Instagram, I usually update, maybe not that day, but that weekend. Because most of what I get done is on the weekend. And yeah, I'll usually have updates for Instagram, sometime during that weekend. YouTube, I'm way behind. But, always am.
Yeah, my Instagram's probably pretty current. So if I just do a post of a photo of something, it's probably that day or the day before. If I do a reel, it might only be a few days, if I sort of want to edit it together a little bit. So yeah, they're pretty regular. And generally, yeah, my videos, when I release like a build one, I pretty much build up to getting the video, get that out, and I might only be like a week or two ahead of the actual construction from what the video might show.
Yeah, that's impressive. I recalled. I've sort of stopped filming recently, but I was filming everything for quite a while, and as a result, I've got some things that I haven't edited that are well over a year old that I'm
okay.
to do. I just I don't know. I kind of had this idea that I'd just be really regular, 2 videos a week on YouTube, but then forgot how much time that takes and how I actually would rather build than.
Yeah, I've probably got 2 projects that are just like in the background that I've sort of started little bits and pieces on and filmed some things for those, but they'll probably be videos that are just one video for the whole thing rather than a series. So that's sort of something I sort of started earlier this year. So I'll see how long those take to sort of get finished and out, or they might even be some that they'll never get finished and you'll never see or know about. So yeah, we'll see.
And I'm tempted sometimes, but everything I build, just about, I film, and I really want to get it out there. But right now, I was doing 2 builds at once. God, when was it? I had started putting video out on that. And in the meantime, I started another build that's more than half done, and I haven't put any video out on it yet at all. And I, started on BO, and I glued the neck in last week. I got very little left to do, woodworking wise. And Instagram has that, but YouTube, I think I just put the fretboard on.
Yeah.
So I'm like way behind. But
like time travel.
It's starting to get exciting enough that I really am, interested and excited about getting that video out. So I got to find time to edit. It's hard.
Yeah, I was putting things up a few weeks ago, the day I did them on Instagram, but then I've had to leave things because it's got nitro finish. I leave it a month to cure, so there's nothing to put up. And I try not to put up anything I'm building for someone else until they've seen it, because I feel like I want them to see it first. But I don't know.
Yeah,
I've had to worry about that a little bit, but this GGBO build is for a friend's son, and he has no clue. So, I'm free to do whatever I want online right now because he doesn't have a clue.
By the way, I can see in the comments someone saying there's 10 people watching, but only 5 are chatting. That might be because 3 of those 10 people might be us. Myself, I'm not 100%.
We've never been sure of that, have we?
I also find I've mentioned this before, I watch a lot of my YouTube on my TV, which is like a smart TV. So it's got the internet on it, like most TVs do these days, but you can't leave comments, and you can watch the chat, but you can't interact with it. So it's great, but then I have to remember if I really liked a video or want to comment on it to go back and do it later or do it on my phone. Oh, great. We've got Jamie from Norway. So anyway, today we were going to talk about some tips for first-time builds, and I'm not sure what made me think of that originally, apart from the fact I've noticed a few people in the Great Guitar Build-Off are entering it because it's their first time wanting to build something. And the great thing about this competition is it just inspires people to do that. It's really open. I like the community sort of element you can join without paying, but for some people, entering a proper competition element is maybe something that's driving them forward.
Yeah.
And I noticed a few people did that last year and have carried on. So that's always a great thing.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of incredible that, I'd done quite a bit when I first noticed Great Guitar Build-Off, and you have no idea what's out there, what's going to happen, what it's going to be. It was intimidating, after, 25 builds. I can't imagine your first build trying to go on Great Guitar Build-Off.
Yeah, there's been a few really good like that. Yeah, good ones like that. But there's also there's been a few where people have sort of started. It's the first build and they're all excited, and then sort of halfway through the season or the competition, they sort of disappear. And I often think, hope they run into trouble that they couldn't fix, or they didn't really gel with doing the videos and putting them up. So often, kind of hope that even though if they didn't finish, filming videos and putting it up, that somewhere they've continued with it and had some success.
Yeah,
that's a good point. I always worried that for some people, because I remember in the forum a couple of years ago, people talking about how frustrating they were finding the videoing and editing and filming. I hope that hadn't put people off the build. But as some people know, things happen in your life and you just can't carry on, or it gets delayed. So
yeah.
Yeah, but I also, Arran, hope that people do finish it. But what I love is the community just seem really helpful at giving each other advice and supporting each other. So I do hope some of what we say is useful. And it would be great in the comments or the chat just to tell us if it is. I see Scott laughing there. I don't know if you're laughing at that, but I'm trying to be professional. I don't know if that is a thing. But I do want to mention as well, again, the the Guitar Builder Collective forum, because I think it's really good, and people might not know about it or use it that much. Forums are, a thing you've got to physically go out of your way to log into and read, as opposed to Instagram, which people just seem to be on all the time. But I get a weekly update from it telling me what I've missed in an email, and I find that quite useful. So do either of you want to kick us off with what you think is a good tip? Should we just go round in a 3 and go?
Yeah, one each at a time. Yeah.
I'm going to be pretty short and sweet. I tried to put a lot of thought into it, and I really only have one big tip, honestly. I've dealt with a few people that, have questions and they're trying to learn and want to get started, and they inevitably always, come up with super awesome, expensive, wonderful wood that they want to work with, and get really, really ambitious and want to put everything you could possibly imagine into one build, their first one. And I'm always, my advice is start small and start cheap. They have these grand ideas in their head, and I'm like, the first thing you're gonna build is going to be garbage. Don't waste some really good expensive wood making your first build, because you're gonna be disappointed. Absolutely. Everybody, I want a kill switch and the Jimmy Page wiring and all this crazy stuff. I'm like, just settle down. Build a neck. Just take it easy. You're gonna ease into this. Use some cheap wood. Your first few builds, until you'll see. Just you'll see.
Yeah, I have to totally agree. I'll cross off one of mine, because I also think you've got to start simple as you can. Even if you're starting with a kit that you're buying in. When you're buying a kit, I always recommend, if it's your first kit, get a simple kit. So something like a Telecaster, it's got a bridge that just screws on, as opposed to a floating bridge. It's easier to set up than a tunematic bridge. It's just simple. And simple is just, it helps you with confidence, I think. It means you won't get lost and confused. And as you said, cheap. Don't worry about it.
Spend some time doing setups. Get used to that. And once you know the mechanics of that, it's horribly essential for doing a build.
Yeah. Even sort of related to that, which I didn't have on my list, but I've sort of thought of now, is that as simple as pull a guitar apart first. If you've got a cheap guitar, especially if it's got a bolt-on neck, take the strings off and take it apart and have a look and work out how it works when it's in front of you to see. Because then when you build it, you kind of have a bit of an idea of how everything's meant to work.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. That was actually my number one, was practicing setting up a guitar. Because I definitely, when I first started, didn't really understand properly what intonation was. I just sort of tried building a guitar. So I think my first thing I did was I took a guitar that I had, or maybe I bought really cheap, and built a new body for it. But I hadn't quite worked out exactly how the bridge is positioned. I was just trying to copy from one across to another. And if I'd spent more time learning how the setup works, I would have found that whole process much easier, because it's so essential.
Even things set up for me that I don't know how long I've probably been playing the guitar for probably 25 years before I started building. So I'd mucked around with setting up and things, but I'd never touched a truss rod or adjusted a truss rod on a guitar that I owned until I actually started building them myself, because I was just too scared to. I knew what the truss rod did, and it kind of just terrified me that this guitar, guitar that I'd spent years saving up for, and I didn't want to wreck. It's like, why I want to turn something that's going to move the whole neck? So, every now and then when I'd get them serviced properly, they'd probably adjust that. But things like the truss rod I didn't touch until I actually built my first guitar. And since then, now I've gone back and, had a play around with some of those other ones. But certainly, practice and understand how things are meant to work before you try to build something.
Yeah. It's always amazed me how little most guitarists know about their guitar. I was that way. As a kid, I've got the second guitar I ever owned, and I probably never touched the setup, ever.
Yep.
I didn't have a clue. If I were messing with it, I would have never gotten it fixed yet. Most guitarists don't know anything about their guitar.
Yeah, I remember on my first guitar adjusting the saddles to make them straighter, because I was a bit annoyed that they looked a bit wonky, not knowing that it was there for a reason. But it goes back to what you said, Scott. If you're starting with something cheaper and not worrying about really expensive woods, then you don't have that worry that Arran was just talking about damaging something when you're adjusting a truss rod or something like that, because it's not as precious.
I saw a video sometime this week or last week, and I don't remember who or where it was, but it was somebody talking about, you go ahead and adjust the truss rod. I mean, he talked about the fact that everybody's always, has this real trepidation about touching the truss rod, and he said, "You're not going to break it." And it was the first time I thought about it. Yeah, I was always nervous about that too. I mean, even like my first few builds, I'm really nervous about, using that truss rod, but you're going to have a hard time, causing damage.
Yeah.
But you don't know these things until you've done it. People can keep telling you, but try it out.
I still have in the back of my mind, even the more recent builds, that I've still got visions of just adjusting the truss rod and like the whole fretboard just flying off straight away, and it's irrational. But every time I do it, it's like, is this fretboard going to fall off when I turn this a little bit? And it's just, and then you hear the glue cracking that's in the glue that's got into the channel. You hear that glue cracking. It's like, oh, what's going on?
I was just about to say, to this day, I'm still nervous when I do.
Yeah.
I pull that exact face when I'm tuning a guitar.
I think it was the second build I did on YouTube. So it was like, I don't know, my third or fourth actual build. And I was mostly done with it. I was ready to do my fret job, and I had to try to adjust the truss just a tiny bit, and it snapped immediately. The head of it broke off. I didn't test it before I put it in there. And it was, it was a cheap truss rod I got off of eBay, and I had to rig up a deal that would give me a handle where I could pull it out. So I actually managed to get that truss rod pulled out. I had another one just like it, but it left the sleeve. The plastic sleeve stayed in there. And there was no way I could get the other truss rod in there. So that build was just dead in the water. So, at least building early on, I actually did have one that broke, and I test them every time, or I try to now, and I'm still scared every time I go to adjust one.
Yeah.
Can I just put out there that I used to buy a lot of guitars on eBay secondhand to experiment on. So partly setups, but also just partly changing finishes and upgrading stuff. And what I found was it wasn't worth buying a nice guitar cheap secondhand, because if it was cheap, there was quite regularly something wrong with it. So if I wasn't buying it to learn how to do a fret dressing or something, sometimes they're in such bad condition that it was just hard to work with. So I ended up just buying a few like cheap brand guitars for £60 or £70, and that was, I mean, the quality of that may not be great, but it was more consistent than buying something secondhand and then finding out it was somehow damaged or there was something seriously wrong with it.
Yeah. I bought a Squire at a pawn shop to mess around, and it ran into the same thing. It wasn't a good guitar.
Yep. I was say the tip my sort of tip that I had, which is truss rod related, is that probably the time spent for the best effect is the fretboard and frets. That if you're going to spend time getting something perfect as your first guitar, if it is a scratch build, that's what I've sort of found, that practicing getting a even and consistent radius on the fretboard without too many dips and dings and things like that, because I think that'll if people can get that right, or as good as they can on the first build, that'll give them a pretty good feeling, rather than something that they totally mess up the fretboard or the radius, and it makes it sort of unplayable to an extent. So if you're going to spend time on one thing and watch people do it and think about it and practice it, that would be my advice. And I still, the first few that I made, that was sanding with the radius beam was the bit that I was sort of most nervous about. And you do like a little bit and you check and you do like a little bit more, and, you know, just learning which grits you needed to start with and then adjust it, and then, you know, putting too much pressure on. So that's what I would probably say is a technical process thing. That is sort of worth practicing and thinking about to put a fair bit of effort in there. Yeah.
There are certain things in a build that they have complexity that you wouldn't have thought of. Somebody I saw, maybe it was last week, they put a video out. It was like their first build, and he was working on this fretboard and trying to radius it. And I'm watching him, even though it's sped up. You know, he's working on like half of the board, and I'm just cringing the whole time, going, "Oh my God, no!" And at the end of the video, he's like, "So something happened, and it's all, you know, weird, and I'm gonna have to rebuild it." And I was like, "Dude." Long strokes over the whole thing. There's so many weird things that can happen in trying to radius a board. There are some tasks like that really have some complexity that you have no idea until you've done a few. Yeah.
I think some parts of the build, it's just a process that if you're, I don't know, cutting something out on the bandsaw or getting close to a line, there's things that, you know, you either do them right or wrong, and there's no sort of finesse with it. But yeah, if you're hand sanding a radius in a fretboard, that's a skill that you will learn and get better and practice, and you work out a more effective way to do it.
Yeah. But there are a lot of pitfalls just in that one little task that I wouldn't thought of. But until you get a little experience and realize you have to constantly stay vigilant and make sure that everything's staying flat. I mean, see, and I don't even know how to talk about that because flat's not right because you're trying to make it not flat, but flat along that plane.
Consistently not flat.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, there's so much of it is practice, and it's I'm sure a lot of people that get into guitar building have got there because of an interest in woodwork or guitar playing, and we know from those things that practice improves you a lot. And, so I've a few times recently when I've been making something that I haven't made before, I've made two of them at the same time, so that one that I can pick the better one for what I'm doing, but also just to have a practice, and also to have a second one, like a prototype that I can experiment with, and the actual one that then goes off to be sold or given away. Does that make sense? Maybe not.
I'm sorry, I was reading somebody's question.
Yeah, I think I was too. I was hoping Scott was going to answer. I was reading.
No, that's right. I saw you both looking puzzled, and I thought, are you puzzled with what I'm saying? But no, it's reading.
I'm sorry. No, I saw a question and I was trying to read it and
yeah. I've got it here. It was a tip: Sharpie for body outlines, or mechanical pencil for center lines around the neck pocket. I've got to say, I do quite enjoy it when we see when I'm looking on Instagram or Facebook at people's photos of their works in progress, and you can see their markings and the pencil lines on their bodies. I quite enjoy that, a reveal of their thought process.
I often leave mine. Yeah, I often leave mine on there longer than I need to, just in case I need to come back to it later. So, yeah, up until the final sanding, there's often lines sort of all over it. Or even if the recent ones, I had to, what was I doing? Routing the control cavity, and I had it recessed a little bit further for the 3-way and the 5-way switch, because I didn't want the whole thing just to be 3 mil thick on the top. So I kind of left the pencil marks where I'd set up the fences to route that little bit, and that was there right till the end. And fortunately it was, because I had to go back and make it a little bit deeper. So yeah, often I've got heaps of lines, because I don't want to, even if I think I've finished with it, it's staying there just till the end, just in case.
Now, Aaron, I remember something you said a couple of weeks ago, which is that you sometimes mark things out and then you have a couple of weeks before you go back to the project and you can't quite remember what the marks are necessarily.
Yeah.
I've tried my best to photograph everything as I go along, so I can go back to my photographs and try and remember what I was doing a few stages before. I make notes, but it doesn't always remind me. I sort of, like you, I can't quite remember why I took that photo. But particularly if I'm taking apart wiring and wanting to put it back together on a guitar, I try to photograph that.
Yeah, I've done that. Yeah, I draw all over the place. I write notes on the top, all kinds of goofiness.
Yeah.
It's going to get sanded out, so, you know.
Yeah, fair enough. So not with a Sharpie.
When it comes to outline, I don't care. I mean, you know, because whatever you draw is going to get, you know, trimmed off. So neck pocket, I don't know.
I've got to say I use Sharpies a lot because they're really bold, and sometimes bits of my studio are a bit more shady or darker than they need to be when I'm cutting something. Yeah,
I generally haven't used Sharpies for marking. I've got a couple of just a pack of cheap mechanical pencils that are like, I don't know how thick they are, but they're quite thick. So yeah, they're really good to use, and they're quite soft, so they're not going to dig into the wood, you know, as you try to draw on it.
The only time I really think about it is when I want to get a picture of the actual drawing for, you know, Instagram or something, and then Sharpie's almost not hard enough. It's hard to get it to show up, especially if you try to take a picture of drawing, you know, like on paper. It's really hard to get it to show up.
So do either of you draw your designs out first?
Usually. Yeah, these days usually.
Not by hand. I'm just trying to think now. Some of them I have. Probably the earlier ones. Actually, a bit of everything. I've done some on paper where I've got sort of templates off the internet and sort of traced around those, or existing guitars to get a shape that I wanted, and, you know, like draw 2 or 3 on, and then kind of join the lines that I kind of like the look of. So I've done that for a couple of them. Some have been, you know, if it's just a standard shape, finding the right template off the internet. More recently, it's been doing it all on the computer on Adobe Illustrator. So, last year's Great Guitar Build-Off one, which is the same that I'm sort of doing for the 2 current ones. That's all been done online. But even then, that was getting, you know, if I wanted a particular starting point, I'd download a PDF of a template of something that I liked and put that on, and then trace around it and move it sort of all digitally. So, yeah, a bit of combination of everything, but yeah, sort of moving towards a bit more on the computer.
That's probably a pretty good tip for newer people is, you know, do a full-scale drawing.
It's really, the few that I did, it's actually really rewarding. If you measure up the scale length and you get the neck width right, you know, the different parts, and then you trace out a little bit and draw, and you kind of stand back and, you know, if you try to freehand draw a guitar on a A4 bit of paper, it always looks terrible. You never get the proportions right. But when you draw it out to scale and you look at it and think, man, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think you're right, Scott. That is a good tip. I always tend to draw mine out I use tracing paper, so I draw it out on a big bit of paper, and then I often roll another bit over to make, but I use different coloured pencils, so I always start with a light pencil, yellow, and then a red, and then a blue, and then by the time I've made all those changes, I can't really see what's going on, so I put another bit on and draw over it. But recently I have also sometimes drawn straight onto the wood I'm going to cut up. The body. Yeah.
Well, very often I wind up doing that for the neck. I'll, you know, draw everything to scale on the wood, but very often I start with an actual drawing on paper. And I've gotten to where I like to do that for a number of goofy reasons too, for, you know, pictures, progress pictures. There was one I did the full scale drawing. I think it was Great Guitar Build-Off 2. And I mean, it was just highly detailed. I mean, I had, you know, shading on the truss rod, and it just looked good. And as the build went on, it got dirtier and dirtier, you know, and I had little stains on it. And there was something nostalgic about that, you know, that the way the drawing was finally finished when the guitar was finished. You know, it looked like it had gone through some some work too, and it's still hanging on my wall.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I kept all the first drawings I did for guitars, and I also then used to go over and paint on them and colour them in and stuff. Colour them in. But yeah, I realised I just threw one away the other day, so I don't really. Maybe I should be more precious with them. Neil says he doesn't. He just has the idea in his head and uses a template, and mod it. I presume you mod it as you go along, Neil. One other tip I had, which sort of relates back to what Scott was saying before about not being precious, is I would think that possibly on your first guitar you're building is to think of it as a long-term project. So you could build it, but then you could finish it in one way, and then maybe when you want to try out a different paint finish or something, you could just go back to that body and reuse that body. Or you could swap out the body for a new body you're making, or if you think I'm going to be better at making a neck, or I want to try making a neck in a different way, then make a new neck for it. So you've got something that you are slowly upgrading or changing and working on that you're not precious about, that is going to be a sort of thing you can keep using.
Yeah, especially with your first one, if you got the mindset that this is not going to be a masterpiece.
Yeah.
However, at the same time, because there were a handful of little experiment builds I did with just the worst 2x4 pine you can get your hands on, and because I knew it was cheap, trashy pine, I was not as careful. It was easy to slide into the idea of knowing it's trash, and you wind up kind of treating it that way. So, kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess some people, even if it is a not great first build, you might want to keep it as a document of your very first thing.
Yeah.
Back to something someone said in the comments, I've still got my first ever electric guitar, and I've mentioned this before. I've painted it multiple times. It was a Strat with a floating bridge, but I filled the bridge and the hole for the bridge, the route for the bridge, and just to practice doing that on a guitar. So I've definitely abused that one and kept it and used it over and over again. And I quite enjoy that is my, it's had this journey with me through playing and now building.
My first guitar has a story. I have it now, but yeah, it's a story. Kind of a long story, but short version. I'd had it for a few years. It was the first one I played for a few years, and moved to Kansas, and I sold it to a friend, and he sold it to some friend of his, and he sold it to some, and I don't know how many friends it went through. And after, 15, 20 years, it wound up back to that first friend. And when my brother came down for Christmas a couple years ago, he sent that guitar with him.
Oh,
so
amazing.
My first guitar went all over Kansas, and somehow it came back to me. And oh my God, it was trash. The headstock had been broke at one point. I mean, it was not a good guitar to start with, but it was garbage when it got back to me. So I had this idea: I'll just strip all the hardware off, and I'll use that hardware, build a new one. It'll be like a reincarnation of my first guitar. And I went to take the bridge off, and the block on the trim just crumbled, and I haven't been able to find a replacement. So it's just sitting in pieces in the corner of the shop. But I do have my first guitar.
Yeah, I've got most of my first guitar. I don't have the body, but I've got the neck and all the, I don't forget the bridge anymore. Pickups and bits and pieces of it was pulled apart for different projects, and the body the body was incorporated to some other projects that were non-guitar related, and I've still got that. I actually early on I made a body for it just out of a lump of wood that I had hanging around, and just that was in my cigar box guitar sort of days. So I pretty much made like a small body and used cheap parts just to see if I could get it working again with the different pickups. So yeah, I've got bits of my first one around still.
Eric's asking what my guitar was. It was a Celebrity Ovation. For a real short time, they did some electrics, and who knew?
Yeah, I was about to say, I don't relate Ovation to electrics. That's cool.
Yeah. Or why they would call it an ovation, like all their acoustics. At the time, I didn't know anything about, celebrity or ovations or what, but
I've just put up a comment from Poo Ninja about the small mill near him, interested in what cool woods they have available. And I thought I'd drop in then a tip that someone put on Instagram. It was Jamie Fat Patanga, and he said that IKEA near him give away lots of free straight edge bits of woods in all shapes and sizes. Basically, he said it's like a pick and mix of just leftover bits. So you can find drawer runners and stuff like that. But he goes there to grab bits. And I've got to say, loads of my jigs and storage things in my workshop are made of old IKEA furniture and stuff. So finding old bits of wood around is quite fun.
I haven't done a lot of looking for, free castaways. I probably should.
It feels like a whole challenge to make a guitar out of something that's chuck away.
That would be fun.
Yeah, I've got a few templates that are bits of IKEA shelves, which are okay, but you can't use them multiple times really because they start to get bashed up a bit.
Through the years, I've gotten kind of the same material. It's not actually IKEA shelves, but some shelving material, and it's good for templates.
So one of my other tips. So I've lost track of how we're going round in a circle here.
I'll throw in another one. So it was related to my like the focus on the neck. So sort of then the opposite to that is like have fun with the things that aren't as critical. So like body shape, even though there's some ergonomics to body shape of how it feels, but at the end of the day, the shape of the body really isn't going to have much of an effect on how it sounds or plays. So I think those things that you can be creative and you can make a cool shape and put in carves and details and those kind of things. Like, yeah, they're the bits that you can kind of have fun and enjoy because if you stuff it up, the guitar will still play the same as it did before. It'll just look or feel a little bit different in one particular part. So I think it's kind of knowing that there's that balance of some things that you just got to really focus on and try to get right the best you can. And then there's other parts where you can just have fun and be creative and know that if you mess something up with the shape of the body, then it actually probably isn't going to make much difference at all apart from, what you think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
However, related, that's another thing. Everybody seems to, just really want to dive in and make their own shape. And it seems to always go really weird and not initially. It's shocking when you get into it, just how difficult it is to make a new shape that actually, looks good.
I do like the idea though of having even if you just make a shape that's a telly, for example, or then you could finish the guitar and then go back and experiment with carving into it, carving a bit more of a belly carve or changing the shape slightly.
Yeah,
I think you're right, Arran. You can be creative and not worry about it affecting the guitar too much. But I remember, Scott, I can't remember if it was on here or somewhere. I remember us looking at a build a while ago. It might be one of the Great Guitar Build-Off ones, and the shape was just a bit odd. It was their own thing, and it just looked strange. And I couldn't work out personally if it looked uncomfortable to me just because it looked so different to a normal guitar.
Yeah.
And whether I liked it or not because it looked so different, it was just strange.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that makes it real hard to come up with a new shape is you come up with something that it's hard to put a finger on what it is about this that doesn't look right. Yeah. But then again, realistically, there's a few design considerations in shape that really are there for ergonomic purposes that a lot of people don't realize or think about too. The longer the top horn is, the better it's going to be balanced when you're hanging it on a strap. Some things like that keep you from getting in the neck dive. there are some design considerations like that nobody really thinks about. So in a lot of ways, Leo got some things right with the Strat for sure, but and it's a pretty iconic shape, but which I guess is why most variations are variations of the Strat body.
Sometimes you're right, it does work, but also it's just so familiar now and built into our minds, it's hard to imagine it being different. I can't remember exactly what I read recently about the Fender guitars, whether it was the Telly or the original Telly or the Strats that he built that people didn't want to produce because they thought no one would buy it because it's just literally a block of solid wood. I mean, carved into a shape. It must have been the Telly because it didn't have any carves on it. It's just sort of solid. And then the Strat came along, which was more curvy. But people did want to buy it. So
Weird.
That's always find that interesting for guitars and compared to other design things. So like, you think of car shapes and designs for the same brand and, make have changed over the years. They adapt, but I can't think of many examples where the shape hasn't fundamentally changed. When you think back to a 1950s, Strat Telly or Les Paul, like it's people, other companies have tried to change and adapt things, but it's not like it's evolved. And there's been small changes, like with the Fender headstock shape has changed a little bit over the years. But I can't think of a lot of examples in other sort of design areas where something has stayed the same right from the start. And it wasn't like they went through like a lot of variations first before they got to the Strat or Telly shape. It's kind of like these are the first two, or a couple of the first two, and it hasn't changed, and still the most popular out of anything.
Yeah, absolutely. So are we saying people should or shouldn't experiment?
Absolutely.
What I love about guitar building is, and when I first started just buying guitars and customizing them, is the ability to be creative and change things on it. But that's a personal thing. It's very much personal.
Yeah.
I heard the Guitar Nerds podcast the other day talking about the fact that who would have known, I guess when Fender was first building Strats, that there'd be whole companies that exist just making variations of Strats, and multiple companies doing that now, and how the innovation or the change comes from the slight changes they're making and not these major things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've talked before about how guitar people are weird. It seems like bassists are so much more open to, different designs and different things. The guitar people are just weird. They have something in their head from when they were young. I love Jimmy Page, so, Les Paul's the only thing I'll ever care about. So many guitars, they want, a Les Paul, a Telly, or a Strat. And guitar people are weird.
Yeah.
Those three are just so iconic that people just seem to gravitate toward them. And so.
I think for, whether people want to go crazy and do their own thing or build something familiar, it's, I don't think it really matters. Like if you love a particular guitar and you want to make your own version of it and hold it and it feels like that guitar, I think that's fantastic. I know there's a few guitars, like I haven't made a bass before, but when I think about doing a bass guitar, it's like, oh man, I really love I love the Rickenbacker bass shape, and bass players say they're uncomfortable to play and they don't feel good, but to me they're iconic. And if I was going to make a bass, I'd love to go, right, I'm just going to make a Rick bass to see,
Yeah. I've built some things specifically because I had no other way to get my hands on them. The first asymmetrical neck. I don't know where I would ever find a guitar with an asymmetrical neck, so I built one just to, see if I'd like it.
Jamie's just mentioned where if you're building your first guitar and you want to make a shape like a Strat, and you don't know where to get measurements from, where should you buy or get templates from? So obviously there's loads of companies that make templates you can buy. You can print them out and mount them onto some MDF and cut them out to make your templates. But there's a Facebook group I've just put in the chat that I joined years ago called the Electric Guitar Builders Template Group. And within the group, one of the options on the tabs at the top is media, I think, or files. And there's just so many files of different designs. Some are that people in the group have uploaded their own designs to work from. But it's such a great resource. There's so much free stuff out there to use. I do worry, though, that some of those templates that put up there are just nicked from other people and put up. So that the problem with getting free stuff is you might be getting free stuff that the person that originally made it isn't benefiting from.
There's one I've used. I've just opened a tab. I might share it. It's Electric Herald, and people have probably heard of it before. But they've got a lot of one-to-one scale templates, and I've used them a lot for guitars where I've wanted that shape, or even like headstock or tuner positioning, because they're pretty good. So it's called the Electric Herald. I'll share. Hang on, I'm on the wrong page.
Yeah, I never thought about it. There was a Squire I bought at a pawn shop. I think it was like $100, and I took it apart and I kind of made some templates off of it, but not really the full body. It was more the cavities and things like that.
Let me just make sure I'm sharing. There we go. Yeah, so I'll scroll through this. So Electric Herald, guitar templates. And you pretty much can download these. So it was
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So lots and lots of options. Some of them are bodies, some of them are necks or headstocks. Some are both. I think the Strats. We got Fender Strat templates. And you just download PDF, complete plans.
That's amazing. What
different years, different models. Yeah, they've even got what might be the headstock one that basically has like every variation of Tele or Strat headstocks, different signature models over different years. So yeah, this is a really good website that I've used quite a bit.
That definitely sounds like one of the files that I use from that group I mentioned.
I suspect they're probably the same files that are shared, between here or other different groups as well.
When we finish, I'll put a link to the Electric Herald in the description. Yeah, one of the things I do whenever a guitar comes in, because I get quite a few guitars coming in just for a little bit of repair work or a paint job that often involve me having to take off the neck if it's bolt on and all the components, is I make a template of it. So I attach a bit of wood to it, basically route around it. And I found that quite useful. And also sometimes just to get the positioning of the routes for the pickups from it as well. That's what I use a lot of my IKEA shelving bits for, the pickup routes.
That's cool. That's pretty handy.
So one of my tips, which may be a bit of a silly one, is I try to, at the start of when I'm building something, and particularly when I'm doing those drawings, is I try to get all the components ready. So I've got them all. I have little boxes for different guitars I'm working on. Just because it's so frustrating to start building something and be in the swing of something and then realise you don't have a part and have to wait a week or so for it to come in. So sometimes even I'll just use the wrong colour part, for example, a chrome instead of a gold or whatever, but just so I've got something there to temporarily use, even if I then end up changing my mind later on, because I've sometimes lost momentum on things or got a bit frustrated not having a bit there.
Actually, that's another good kind of related tip. For me, it's so much better to have your hardware on hand when you're doing the build, so you've got it, so you can look at measurements and all that kind of stuff. I keep because initially I was really interested in cigar box guitars, so I have a collection of cigar boxes. when I'm doing a build, I'll keep all my hardware and stuff in one cigar box for this build, just to keep everything together so you don't lose stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. When I first started my first few as well, that I wouldn't cut or route anything till I had the components there. But probably, more recently, I'm happier to kind of trust measurements, or if it's a component I've used before, drilling tuner holes or something, it's like I'm happy enough to drill these before I've sort of got them in. But yeah, I'm the same, that since I've got a few projects on the go now, I've got separate boxes for the different parts, and when I order them in, they go in there. And then I've kind of got another stash of miscellaneous kind of things that, different screws or whatever, pickguard screws, or a few, random knobs and things that you might just grab to see if it looks good, or, different colours. So
Corey, actually from Saul Goode Guitars, sent a tip on Instagram that's connected to that, saying that you make sure you've got the hardware, because he didn't realise that not all hardtail bridges are exactly the same. So he's ended up putting a bridge on which wasn't the one that I guess he measured with, and the action was out. I've also found sometimes the holes where you're drilling to screw it down aren't necessarily the same, and of course they could be different spacing, different size saddles. So you've got to make sure you know in advance.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's certain things like back ferrules. There's such little variation in different brands that I really don't like to try to drill those unless I have them, so I can really. And it's like the 30-second guitar, and I will still do a test hole and make sure that this fits on some piece of scrap before I drill into the real project. I like to have my hardware on hand. I really do.
I'm just reading the comments here.
So I have gotten to where I've got, kind of a standard set of hardware I like to do on some stuff, but still, I haven't taken enough notes to, have on hand what this requires. Some things I do, but I need to be more vigilant about, writing down those details.
Yeah, I'm trying to decide on things that I'm making now, not for clients, whether I should have stock things to use, because I've noticed there's certain makes of tuners I prefer over others. But then sometimes the look of one tuner is better than the other for the build I'm doing. So I can never really settle on anything. But I think I kind of feel like it might just help me sometimes just to have, these are my go-to things. And then maybe I'll change them every now and then.
Yeah, I've run into a situation where there's a set of tuners that I really, really like, and now I'm almost married to them. so I'm not. It's Hip Shot. They're these open gear Hip Shots. I don't remember the model number, but they're super light. I mean, really, really, really light. I'm not super happy about the shape of the buttons, but they're just everything else about them is just awesome. But I worry that, it's keeping me from branching out and trying other things that I haven't tried before. When you get into building, there's so many different things that you can get. That's another thing. I mean, starting off, it's kind of hard to know what's good, what to use.
I just have to agree with Ty. I was a bit distracted earlier. Arran, very good.
Yeah, and I just rolled out of bed, so I look like I got a head wound.
It's been the end of a very long day for me, so this is how it looks after a busy day at work.
That's another good thing for new builders is beauty tips.
Eric's just sent me in the comments. He mentioned the snakehead headstock for the Fender that he liked. That they got rid of, and I said I'd never seen it, so he just sent me a picture of it. I'm not sure. That looks. God, with those tuning pegs as well, I like the simplicity of it. Almost looks like, I don't know if any of you know Shane Spill. I've heard him described as the king of cigar boxes. But on his Instagram and YouTube and TikTok, he's often showing old instruments and old cigar boxes and things that were made by people that didn't have access to proper tools or stuff, and they've managed to put together a guitar in some way. And that simplicity of that headstock looks like one of those things that's been made by someone that didn't have things on hand. It's got a unique aesthetic that I quite like.
Mm.
So, any other tips before I go through things that people put in comments?
Let me have a look. I had a bit of a list. I had, so if you're just starting, is to use the tools you've got where you can. So I don't think you need to go out and buy a lot of expensive things. And I know the first, lap steel that I made, I was using tools that probably didn't quite do the job, but the first few electrics, was cutting the body out with a jigsaw and hand sanding, or just the electric hand sander. So I don't think you need to go out and spend a lot of money. I think there's some tools that you might need to buy if it's a specialist thing, but I think and that's from my own experience. It's building a few guitars first with things you might already have before kind of committing to outlaying more money, when you kind of decide that, this is something that I'm going to do for the foreseeable future and it's an enjoyable hobby. That's what I've sort of found.
Yeah. Related to that, though, I was thinking about the fact that it's usually not good to get cheap tools. If you're going to get a tool, a lot of times getting the cheapest one is not going to be good.
Yeah, I've mentioned before that sometimes I buy a cheap tool to decide whether I want to use it before I buy an expensive one. But then what you notice is you think, oh, maybe I don't want to use this tool, but it's actually because it's so cheap that it's rubbish, not because it's the wrong tool. It's just because it's cheap. So it's hard. But I have to agree, Arran, and it links into what Scott said about if you're using what you've got and not being too precious about it being perfect, then you're learning all the process and stuff. And as you go,
you don't need a bandsaw and a spindle sander and a thickness planer and all those things to build. My first few were done all without those.
Yeah,
I have some of those now.
I think there's a lot of value in learning to do something with lesser tools too. But then you can, when you actually have better tools for whatever, you can really appreciate what they do for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd have to agree with Ty as well. Buy quality, but less often. I definitely didn't used to do that, but I'm definitely been doing that. It means all the videos I watch and the things I see on Instagram that make me want tools, I just don't get them as often because I can't afford them. But yeah, definitely have to.
But at the same time, your point, sometimes buying a cheap tool that you don't know. You don't know anything about this tool. You don't know if it's really going to be all that helpful. You go out and spend a lot of money on something high dollar and you don't wind up using it much anyway. That can happen too. So I can see the argument of getting something cheap, for evaluation purposes.
Yeah, well, like I bought an oscillating multi-tool, which was quite cheap. And I thought, I'm probably never going to use it apart from this one job that I bought it for. And then I ended up using it loads, but it burnt out because it was quite a cheap one. So I'm saving up for a better one now.
We've been all over the place on that. So I guess our real tip is buy real high quality stuff super cheap.
or get someone to give it to you, or win a competition. Enter the guitar, the Great Guitar Build Off. They do pretty good spot prizes as well. I have noticed that they've been giving out spot prizes because I've seen it on people's own Instagram, but the spot prizes haven't necessarily been shared by them yet, which is a shame because they're obviously doing great stuff there.
Yeah, I know the first few people who finished builds, I think they got a few spot prizes, and I've noticed a couple on individual Instagrams where they've received some things.
I just know I haven't.
I had a tip which was if you're looking up how to do something on one of the many YouTube channels, it's definitely worth watching more than one person do the same thing, because people, even if they're seemingly doing the same process. They might be doing it slightly different ways or very slightly different tools, or they might be doing it in a totally different way, but with the same end result. And
or they may be doing it really wrong.
yeah, exactly. And you don't know if you're just watching one that they're doing it wrong, I guess.
Yeah.
But seeing lots of different things really helps help you make a decision about what might be the right one for you, I think.
Yeah.
I've got to say, guitar building aside, I'm often watching YouTube for how to do things for video editing, for putting together the videos as well. So YouTube's just so great for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sound like a fairly decent collection of tips. Some of them may be a little confusing. Only have 8 spoke shaves.
Yeah, it's not like we've done a proper list. We've just been chatting.
Yeah. Yeah, what were we talking about today? Oh yeah. Okay, let me think of something.
I could give a few more for now from the social media stuff. So Corey, Saul Goode Guitars, said that try to do roundovers on your body with your router before doing things like drilling the jack hole. And I definitely have made this mistake more than once, where you've gone round the edge of your body with your router bit and suddenly it slipped into the jack hole and you've got a massive dent cut away.
Yep, guilty as well.
That's a good practical point. He said, always clean your glue nozzle. I don't do it often enough, and the amount of times I've had to rip the top off and scoop bits out. Or with my glue, super glues that got like long nozzles on, I'm constantly cutting them down closer to the base.
Mm-hmm.
And always do dry runs when you're doing your glue ups.
Yes, I swear, I just about say it every time on camera. Like, what do I always say? Always do a dry run. Always. Even for, I find myself doing it for some stupid stuff, and I've saved myself some trouble. You know, seems all simple and quick and easy, but yeah.
I used to put guitar strings on the top E and the low E, or when I put my neck in, to then position my bridge to get it correct.
Yeah,
that makes sense. So it's all in the right place and everything lines up and the strings fit nicely over the fretboard and aren't too high or too low. But recently I've seen a few people do this, and I've started doing it now, is I just have a bit of string that goes from the bridge up to the top E tuner, round to the low E tuner and back down to the bridge. And you can pull that tight and get that positioned. And it's so much less of a faff than getting the strings on and off that I used to try and do. But yeah, that's sort of like dry fitting things. I always make sure that's all lined up before I drill my holes. So I always start with my neck in first and then do that. Yeah.
But yeah, early on when I was doing tunematics, a lot of tunematics, I would actually put strings on, so I could move I had a little jig where I could set the bridge in there, and it was at about the right height, but it was on just a piece of plexi, so I could slide it around and find the perfect intonation point for it.
That's a good idea.
Before I would punch holes, I was terrified of placing the bridge in the wrong place.
That's why when I recommend kits to people as a first build, always say something like a telly and not a tunematic, because with a telly, especially if it's big plate, you make a bit of a mistake, you can move it slightly. And with saddles that have that much adjustment, unlike a tunematic, if you put it slightly wrong, you've probably got a bit of give to make up for that mistake.
Yeah. Placing the bridge is scary stuff. But
someone else asked, when was it? It was on YouTube. It was, I don't know how you say his name, Saul78. I'll just mention him in the chat so we've got his name there. He asked about it. He says, I'd love to know if it matters much, the positioning of the pickups when routing the cavity for a not standard body first build. So what's the secret or the science? So I'm not sure if he's talking about the position of the pickups as in their relationship to the nut and the bridge saddles, like how far forward and back they are, because obviously that can change the sound. But one thing that always bugs me is when the strings go over a pickup that's got pole pieces and they don't line up. So for me, that's quite important. Obviously, they're designed to be under the strings for the sound, but aesthetically, that annoys me a bit, which is why I try to, when I do that dry fit, I always try to put the bridge in place and then position my pickups before routing them, just in case.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know for pickups, I read that comment too,
right.
and didn't know whether it was, like how far away from the bridge or the neck for the tone. So obviously, close to the bridge, it's going to be more trebly, and away close to the neck, be more bassy. But for routing I generally route the pickup cavities just off the centre line, but then drilling the holes, if it's got a pickup ring, I'll wait till I've got the strings on, so I can just move that adjustment left and right, so it's centred.
Yeah,
but even with those, like a Strat neck pickup, it won't, because it's narrower there than on the bridge. And I've looked on, my Strat as well, that the two outside poles are going to be outside the strings a bit, just because that's the way they designed it. They didn't design the pickups to sort of taper as the strings taper. So that was on the Middle Earth guitar when I, wound those pickups and put it in and looked at it. It was like, that's, I sort of saw how far out they were. It's, man, what have I done? And then I've just come inside and looked at my, Fender Strat, and it looked exactly the same. It's like, well, that's, obviously how they make it.
Some companies do taper them, so you get different pole spacing for the neck and the bridge, but not all do that.
The last several I've done are multi-scale, so yeah, that's why I just get rails. I just get rail pickups.
Yeah.
When I heard that question, I would have assumed he meant distance from the nut and the bridge. And I remember at some point seeing this big conversation about so you're not at a canceling spot in the node and all this nonsense. And I don't know. I've just kind of gone off the assumption that doesn't really matter all that much. I don't know. I don't think there's, a dead spot where, if you place your pickup here, it just really doesn't have as much, tone as it would have, a couple millimeters away. But I don't know that for sure.
I know I've read with the Strat neck pickups that they're measured to be kind of like at the 24th fret, because then that'll be the 12th fret 24th. So I think like that I lose track of the nodes and the frequency as well, that that kind of works for the open strings, but as soon as you fret any of the notes, that string length has changed and it's no longer in that spot. So if you're playing open strings and not going to change anything, that might work, but really it's once you start playing notes, it's that effect's gone.
Yeah.
So this is back to what I was saying about trying to decide if I should stick with certain hardware for my guitar builds. I also want to decide whether I should just stick to certain pickups as my go-to when I'm building something. And I've got a guitar that I've sort of built. It's not really a guitar, it's a plank of wood with a neck and a bridge on it, but they're raised quite high, so I can position my pickups and find the right position for how I like the sound. But that being said, that would be for specific pickups, because I definitely think the position of the pickups can change the sound as much as the different pickup can change the sound. And so when Troy's here, some people have said that on a baritone having a neck pickup would be useless. I would argue with that. Why is it that baritone guitars that you buy do have neck pickups then? Because they definitely do. So I don't agree with that specifically. And I've definitely noticed, I had a guitar in the other day that had 3 pickups, 2 single coils and a humbucker. And when I was playing clean, you could hear the difference between the 3. And when you split the coil of the humbucker, you could really hear the difference. And when I had a bit of overdrive on it, you could hear the difference. But when I put more of a heavy metal distortion on, you couldn't hear the difference between the pickups. It was like really high gain, and they didn't make it, like splitting the coil made no difference at all. So there's so many things that affect the sound and the tone, etc., that I'm sure having your pickup slightly forward or back's not going to be especially for your first build, isn't going to be something that's noticeable.
It's something I considered early on, and I couldn't find anything definitive, and I kind of just started ignoring it, and things seem to have been all right. So,
a couple of other things that people said are, so Jamie said he built his first. This is Fat Patanga. He built his first guitar for last year's Great Guitar Build-Off. Had never done a kit, used a router or adjusted a truss rod and leapt straight in. And what helped him was the community. So absorbing as many videos as he could, not being afraid to comment and ask questions on it. Yeah, because like we keep saying, everyone's really friendly and encouraging. Mm-hmm. Although I would say on Facebook, some people are very judgmental. So
yeah, Facebook and everything.
He also said, save your takeaway pots as they make great bench cookies and for storing knickknacks and little things in. I'm not sure about the bench cookies. Aaron, I'm going to be buying next week, I think, some of the bench cookies you recommended that I've always not bothered with. But I've got loads of pots like that, takeaway pots. My kids are really into Play-Doh, and the Play-Doh goes hard making the pots because I find it really good for, you know, as I get my components ready to start with, I used to put them in little bags and then put them in a box. But actually, the bags are so fiddly. So just lots of different boxes. I put all my bits in, put it in a big box, and that's that guitar's components. And when I need it, that comes out, and it helps me stop fishing around.
Yeah.
Oh, he was the one that mentioned IKEA. And as Scott said at the beginning, he says, don't be precious. If it goes wrong, it goes wrong.
Expect it to.
Expect it to. That's your key difference to everyone else expects it to go wrong.
The first build, absolutely. Just, I mean, of course, try your hardest, but expect it to be garbage. That was early on looking for YouTube content, you know, because when I got interested in building, I just wanted to gobble up everything I could get my hands on. And you run across a lot of these builds that, you know, that's my first one and it turned out perfect. And yeah, every time I see one of those, I'm like, bullshit, it did. We'll see a sound demo.
Well, like I said last week, or a few people said last week, your video that you just put up where you were making the headstock and it went wrong and you had to fix it. Seeing things like that's really great because it just reinforces how everyone makes mistakes, but how you can solve something. And the solving's the key.
It's so easy to do that kind of screw up where you just take for granted, you know, something. It's dangerous. My
background is in arts education, so I do a lot of art lecturing and teaching, or used to. And one of the things I always used to say, which was lots of lecturers and tutors said, was kind of embrace happy accidents. So sometimes something can go wrong, but if you step back and think, don't think of it a mistake, but think of it as potential for something different that you could do, then there's potential for new creativity and making something different.
Yeah.
I think that's
creative ideas for fixing it.
I wish I could remember who it was, but someone I saw it on Instagram had a guitar that had a green contoured body with some sort of flame finish, but they were routing out a cavity underneath and they'd gone too far and made a hole in it. So now there was a hole in the top which shouldn't have been there. So what he ended up doing was cutting a bigger shape and putting a bit of wood in it, like a bow tie fill in there. And it actually looked different to what he intended, but it was like a feature instead. So that was an example of taking something that had gone wrong and trying to make it into something aesthetic and good.
Yep. Yeah, there are a lot of happy accidents.
Also on Instagram, Barry Christian said it's not so much of a tip, but having links to timber and luthier suppliers in different parts of the world that you're in would be useful. So I did set up some space on the Guitar Builders forum for that, but I don't really think anyone's really used it. But I'll put that link in that Arran had for the Electric Herald, because that seems great.
I was meaning to go in there to add some places in. So this weekend I might have a look and put some of the sites or places I use.
Yeah, I mean, me too. I set up the forum or the space in the forum, but didn't actually put anything in it myself yet. But that's what's good. Like someone saying, ask questions. Quite often, if you see someone building something, you can ask them where they got the bits from. There was another question. So Karen Bassett asked, what are the important steps for gluing in a neck and how to get it positioned prior to gluing? So dry fitting the bridge, the stop tail, the tuning pegs. I think we've covered a lot of that with some of the things you mentioned about dry fitting, using string. I'd love to see your little jig, Scott, that you were talking about to move your tunematic around. That sounds really interesting.
I just had a couple bolts that were about the right size for the post holes on that bridge. They were I can't come up with the word at the moment, but they were flush set into a piece of plexi. It just happened to be about the right height for where you would set the posts. So it wasn't very glamorous, but just a piece of plexi, so I could just skate it around. But then the bolts were in the right place where I had ground, a little bit of a point on them, so I could just tap them with a hammer and, mark exactly where to put those.
She also asked, do we paint before or after gluing? And then I'm trying to connect everything here because I said to everyone that put a comment up, I'd mention it. Robert Sanderson on Facebook said, it's easy to get excited about getting to the end product of a playable instrument, but fight urges to skip steps, and you won't regret doing your best work every time on an instrument or taking your time. So he said, spend more time than you think you need on finishing. And I'm definitely guilty of jumping ahead. I often paint things before I've finally fitted it and then find I need to make an adjustment and it needs to be repainted. So I've wasted time. But luckily, with a lot of what I do, which is meant to look very relict or damaged in some way, it kind of helps.
That temptation is really strong, especially your first one. Early on, it's very, very hard. Yeah.
I'm getting better at that. I think early on, I was just jumping ahead without testing too much. Whereas now, I suppose since I've made a few guitars for other people now as well, it's kind of like, you can kind of, if I do it for my own guitar and stuff like that, that's one thing. But if someone else's, it's for them, it's kind of like, oh, no, I need to take the time and put put all the components in and make sure everything fits in the cavity. And that's where I've come awry sometimes, that the cavity's not quite big enough for some of the crazy things to put in there.
I hadn't really thought about it, but that's still a battle I contend with constantly. I don't know how many times on camera I'm like, okay, I can't think of a reason not to do this yet. Yeah, because I know I like to dive in and I'm all excited about getting to this step and just sit back and wait and think, is there anything I need to do before this? To this day, that's still a problem. I'm just constantly thinking about it.
Yeah. Sometimes I know there's something I need to do before this step, but this step's just too much fun. So I end up doing it anyway. And then sometimes you can get away with it, but not always.
Well, yeah. Well, sometimes you're thinking, I can't picture anything. And you may run into something that informs you that, this is why you don't do that yet. But sometimes you don't know until you try. Staining is one of the big ones for me. Staining or dyes. Like this one, I've been so excited to get the dye on the body. I've tried real hard to resist until the last minute, and I finally get to the point where I think I can do it. I don't know if I'm going to regret it, but at least with dye, if you need to, you can always redo it.
I like this idea of blowing up balloons in your F holes to prevent stain going in. When I went on the course that I went on for how to finish using sprays and things, what I was taught was when you've got things like that, they were just basically stuffing it full of kitchen roll, toilet paper or whatever, because that blocks the space and absorbs any sort of overspray.
Interesting.
Oh yeah, this is a good one. The wipe down with white spirit will let you see the natural finish look and won't affect the wood itself. Yeah, if it's your first build, you may get a bit dejected when you're staining something and it dries and think, this doesn't look as good as it should do. I thought everyone else is like shining and popping.
Yeah.
It's just because you haven't got the finish on yet.
I've seen a lot of time you do this. I was going to say, I've seen a lot of people that are dyeing maple and they don't do a dark ingrain dye first. So some of them I'm thinking, all right, it looks good. Imagine what it would have looked like.
I think you just put on your Instagram, didn't you? The one you're working on at the moment, you put your first one, which was purple and black, rubbed it down, and then put the next one on. And yeah, that definitely makes a difference.
Yeah, and you usually have to go darker than you would have thought. Because I remember the first time I saw somebody do it, and I'm like, black, I mean, that's kind of overkill. When, you're going to mix these two colors together, so what if, wouldn't you want to do this darker color for your ingrain, and then, but really, not so much. Black's kind of the way to go, largely. The ingrain stain needs to be pretty dark.
I'd have to go back and look at my notes because I can't quite remember why, but when I learnt French polishing, we were using black, like to darken it, but also red. If you put red in, it warmed the wood, and I can't remember exactly why, again, before you sand it down, but it must have helped make the contrast bigger between certain colours, or maybe it was just to help the colour when you're putting browns on feel a bit warmer and less yellow. Can't remember why it was red. That was a useless tip. Sorry about that.
But for a reason, still, you just don't know what the reason is.
Yeah. So we've been chatting for a while. But either of you got any more tips that you've noted down?
No, I think we've covered all the things I'd thought about.
Yeah, I'm tapped out.
We did want to mention after last week where we talked about the invitationals to the Great Guitar Build, or that another person's entered this has been announced since last time, which was Mark Gutierrez. Am I saying his name right?
Yeah.
I've heard some people call him the Guitar Whisperer, which I think is a great description for him. I find his videos, both the way they're filmed, but the way he has his very calming voiceover and ambient music in the background, really engaging to watch.
Yeah.
And the music's all his own as well. That's all his own compositions and playing that he has on his channel.
Oh, really? That's great. So, Arran, you watched his first video, didn't you, for the guitar build-off?
Yes. I think it was only, it must have been only a day or two ago that he was put on the website for an invitational, and he had a video out, or maybe about a week ago, for Great Guitar Build-Off. But in that, I noticed he hadn't put in what category he was in. So maybe he was just keen to sort of get the videos up and running before it was put on the website. But yeah, it's basically concept sort of ideas of building the neck out of carbon fibre tubing. So literally, the tubes to make the neck of different diameters, and how you would do it and attach it to the fretboard. And so as you would expect from him, something that a lot of us would look at and think, I'm glad I'm not trying to work that out. But yeah, I had a flick through the comments, so you sort of asked what people think about suggestions or the best ways to do it. So yeah, that's going to be another really exciting video of his to watch and to see how it's going to turn out.
Yeah, I love that he says in it as well that he's not sure it will work. It's just an experiment.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he is pretty entertaining to watch. Was it last year he showed up? And that one was fascinating to watch.
Mm.
So.
Was that the CNC one?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah. Yeah, I find myself more and more really enjoying watching the CNC stuff.
Yeah, is that because it's something you want to do but don't do or don't know how to do?
Kind of, but or maybe it's the other way around. It's just, well, especially with his build last year, there were some fascinating possibilities that I could see, from that. And it would be nice to just punch a button and have a whole bunch of work done for you.
Yeah, I find CNC fascinating because it's something I don't do, and I find really compelling. It's
one of those things for me that, I kind of like watching videos of people building things that I could potentially do myself at home. And probably for a long time it was like CNC, that's what people do in workshops and, industries and businesses and, you can't do that at home. But now, people are starting to use it in sheds or, little workshops and things. So I think I've probably got more interested now and probably because the prices are coming down on CNC machines and things, it's kind of like now it's like, maybe I could have a go at that one day at home.
You when you watch some, you can see, some possible uses that would be really hard to do by hand.
Mm.
So, but we talked about this the other day with somebody, the learning curve on just the modeling. So you got something to feed it, is kind of big. I haven't done much 3D modeling, and that's a whole new, set of skills to learn that would not be quick and easy to do, I would think.
So I don't know how but because we've been chatting for an hour and a half already, and I didn't see that much going up new for builds for Great Guitar Build Off. Although 615 Guitars, Rob has finished his build and put video up, definitely worth watching. Maybe we shouldn't talk too much about, unless you've got something you really wanted to mention.
There was nothing super standout for me this week. I was skimming over it again, and to try to be prepared and have something to talk about. And there were, some people had some good updates. It's just nothing really stood out at me. And
I think maybe since we've been going for a while, we can focus on a few more of those next time, maybe. Yeah.
Let's have a focus on a bit more Great Guitar Build Off next time. It might be good as well to put into it. If we've had any favourites from the last few years, or if anyone's had any favourites from the last few years, having just mentioned Mark's one from last year, how much we liked it. So if anyone's watching and wants to leave a comment about one of their favourites, we could look it up. Feel free to mention yourself.
I think I forget pretty quick since it's been running for a few years now. I think the other day there's something I was searching for and an original one came up and I'd totally forgotten about it till it might have been even a suggested video and I kind of clicked on it and had a bit of a watch. So I'd be keen to look back over myself. And that for me, that first year, before I was involved, just watching all the people do the build along, I might have to refresh my memory of some of those.
Yeah. Well, there were some interesting moments. I remember, like somebody did this, Doctor Who guitar, and I think there was like an ice cream sandwich or something. I don't remember.
Cool. Well,
I have gotten to a point where I remember things. I just don't remember what year they were.
Yeah.
That's how I'm at the moment.
Yeah.
Great. So on that note, say goodbye to everyone. Thanks again for joining us and the tips. Hope you found what we said useful. And don't forget, in the description for this video, there's a link to the playlist. You can watch past episodes of this and you'll be able to subscribe for future ones